She thinks I'm Spider-Man all the time. Anyway, so I need to really up my game here.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. Marvel's been revealing more characters that are supposed to be featured in Deadpool 3, so we'll break it all down. Some of these are new ones that are heavily connected to Falcon and Winter Soldier. Big surprise. If you didn't watch that series, there were a couple cool Wolverine Easter eggs that I'll point out later in the video. And as you would expect, they're heavily tied to the original X-Men movies and characters that are going to be in the movie, or they're characters that were connected to those people in the comics that Fox never actually got into in their Marvel X-Men movies or Fantastic Four movies. This video will mostly be about the characters that are connected specifically to Wolverine, since he's such a huge part of the movie, Hugh Jackman's version of Wolverine. If you're brand new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. They're going to be filming Deadpool 3 for a little while longer, so we'll learn more about what's actually going on with the movie. And speaking of Deadpool 3, Kevin Feige himself was actually spotted at a Wrexham game with Ryan Reynolds recently the past weekend. No idea what he was doing there, probably just taking in a casual game because it is kind of the holidays, like most people have gone on holiday break for the most part. But I just did a video about X-23 returning in Deadpool 3. They were trying to get an older version of her back in the movie, and now it looks like we might be getting the Daken character, mostly known as Wolverine's son. His real name is Akihiro, but he's gone by a couple aliases in the comics, mostly Daken. He became the new Wolverine in Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers briefly during Marvel's Dark Reign era, which they're kind of doing right now in Marvel Phase 5. We're kind of heading into a situation like that during Captain America 4 Brave New World, even though that'll be a little bit different from what happened in the comics. He became one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen representing death, just like Wolverine did before him. X-23 was also one of the 4 horsemen, but she was war. Papa bless, like father, like son. One of the big differences, though, between Daken and X-23 is that Daken is Wolverine's biological son, and X-23 is just a female clone of Wolverine. More recently, he's been going by the name Fang. He was resurrected on Krakatoa, and they've been using him in the more recent X-Men comics. He shows up all over the place. He's even part of a big crossover storyline with the Eternals right now, like we just had the Eternals during Marvel Phase 4. Eventually, we'll see some of the Eternals characters come back, and they sort of tease the idea of celestial seeds and what the Celestials are actually doing around the multiverse. They just made him an evolutionary caretaker, a herald of the Celestials with the Death Seed. They're meant to rival the Phoenix Force in their level of power, but since it's a comic book thing and they're always like 10 years ahead of what they're doing in the movies, I wouldn't worry too much about what they're doing in the X-Men comics right now. Even though there's a bunch of crazy stuff happening in Deadpool 3, most of that is drawing on like really old classic X-Men stuff or stuff that goes even further back than that before the original X-Men movies. Daken's mother was a Japanese woman that Wolverine was married to after World War II when he'd been living in Japan. They got into his backstory living in Japan around World War II a little bit during the Wolverine movie. Her name was Itsu. During the last stages of her pregnancy with Daken in 1946, she was killed by the Winter Soldier. Here's where we get to the big Winter Soldier crossover storyline and the Falcon and Winter Soldier stuff. He was trying to use her death and Wolverine's unborn child to lure him out in an attempt to capture Wolverine and return him to custody on Madripoor. That was that lawless island that we saw them visit during Falcon and Winter Soldier, where Sharon Carter's power broker operations were happening. When they're walking around, the Princess Bar that you see here was a huge location for Wolverine in all of his comics. Even though this was happening like right after Avengers Endgame, early in Marvel Phase 4, and they hadn't quite got to the point of revealing a ton of mutants in the MCU, they tried to hint at Wolverine, the X-Men characters, as much as possible during this. After Winter Soldier leaves, because Daken was a mutant, he got all of Wolverine's powers, including his healing factor. He winds up surviving and gets found by the ancient and powerful mutant named Romulus, who has powers similar to Wolverine's. And you find out this is all part of a larger plot where he was secretly manipulating Wolverine his entire life. So he winds up leaving the baby with adoptive parents who name him Akihiro after the adoptive father. The local children taunt him, naming him Daken, which in Japanese is meant to mean mongrel. So even though most people think of him as Daken, he's hated that name his entire life. It's basically an insult he was given as a child. Years later, around 1959, Romulus starts training Daken to be a killer using all of his mutant powers and eventually tries to orchestrate a fight between him and his father Wolverine, and his grand plan is for the survivor of that fight, father on son, to become Romulus's successor. There was this whole storyline where he tried to present himself. He told a bunch of lies about his backstory, claiming he was this apex mutant, but you have things like the Phoenix Force, other way more powerful cosmic entities out there, so there are like way more powerful things in the Marvel Universe. And even though Daken grows to hate Wolverine because he feels abandoned by him, like, why didn't you come look for me? I have mutant powers, of course I was going to survive. It becomes very cats in the cradle, and that's kind of their story across all the comics. Like, even up to present day, Daken hates his father, Wolverine. Then he goes on to have a whole bunch of adventures in the comics separate from Wolverine, just trying to get out from under his shadow. He eventually fought X-23, they worked together, but he's done both things. Like, he's kind of a neutral character. Like, he's done both very evil things, really dark things, and he's also helped people too. So generally, comic book writers have used him as like the very, very dark, like much darker version of Wolverine, even though Wolverine himself was sort of engineered to be an anti-hero, really dark type of character when he was first created. The uber-violent version of Wolverine. Generally, I would say that X-23 is kind of like the opposite direction of that. Like, she's meant to be the more hopeful iteration of the Wolverine character. My assumption, just because there's so much stuff going on in this movie, is that if Daken winds up making it into the final cut, is he's mostly a background character, or they only reference him verbally, just because the whole idea is that Deadpool is jumping around the multiverse using Cable's time travel device, trying to find the perfect version of Wolverine, till he eventually discovers that Hugh Jackman's version is the perfect version. It's meant to be another joke about Kevin Feige recasting Wolverine in real life, like recasting Hugh Jackman with a new version, a new actor, ultimately saying that Hugh Jackman is the perfect Wolverine and he'll never be able to recast him with a better actor. This is kind of why they're designing the movie to be Deadpool kills the Fox Marvel Universe, but also do it as sort of like a Spider-Man No Way Home kind of movie, like X-Men No Way Home, where they honor everything that came before they do a bunch of big recastings. And at some point during the movie, Wolverine and Deadpool will have to fight a bunch of really hardcore, darker versions of all the classic X-Men actors that are coming back from those original movies. So it'll be like different versions of the characters, variants of the characters to make a Loki reference, because Loki will be a big crossover series with Deadpool 3. We even spotted some TVA characters during that last big footage drop of all those Deadpool 3 scenes. Basically, the movie is taking place after the events of Loki Season 2, where the TVA resumes normal operations, but they're mostly focusing on searching for Kang variants. Like, the whole Time Variance Authority becomes more like the Kang Variance Authority. Just picture Miss Minutes trying to deal with Deadpool and Wolverine trying to escape from the TVA. I've already done a much larger video about all the new scenes and Easter eggs that they released recently. Ryan Reynolds did a big post about it and a bunch of parody posts on top of it. Like, these are him clowning on some of the Deadpool 3 scenes that everybody got to look at. Generally, all this X-Men stuff that they're doing is meant to take place in another timeline, another universe, so that they don't wind up trampling on the continuity of the original X-Men movies or like the Logan movie. And generally, all the footage that we actually got to look at is from a specific part of the movie, like almost the exact same scene where they're all fighting classic X-Men and Fantastic Four characters from the Fox Marvel movies and other classic Easter eggs. Like, they had the Fantastic R here, but it's a version based on the one from the original Fantastic Four comics back in the 1960s, not from the one in the movies. And it's being driven not by Fantastic Four characters, but by Toad from that original Bryan Singer X-Men movie. They even had a hot-rodded version of Red Skull's car from the first Captain America movie, so it's meant to be a mishmash of Easter eggs from older Marvel movies and stuff that wasn't in the actual movies, like just stuff from the comics in general. That's kind of why I think that they're on the Void Planet from the Loki series when this is happening, because that's essentially where all that stuff gets dumped, like stuff from all over the multiverse, Easter eggs from all over the comics, and stuff that was not in the TV shows and the movies. It would also explain why all the versions of the X-Men characters that they wind up fighting here are way more hardcore and way more comic booky too. There's even supposed to be a couple scenes clowning on the Avengers Assemble moment at the end of Avengers Endgame in the final battle, like Captain America's Avengers Assemble moment, with a bunch of variants of the character, like a bunch of different versions of Deadpool. You just have to picture a much bigger version of what we saw during Loki Season 1, Episode 5, with like all those other Lokis that banded together on the Void and were fighting each other.
Why the hell is there an alligator in here?
He's a Loki!
Really hoping we actually see Alligator Loki at some point during the series, but I think part of the idea is that he escaped the Void with Kid Loki. There's a whole bunch of big stuff coming up. Next big multiverse series we do have that'll be sort of connected to all this stuff that's going on is What If Season 2 episodes. That'll start next week. I'll be doing videos for all that, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss any of it. And speaking of all the Loki stuff that's going on during Deadpool 3, there is Loki's multiverse tree from after the events of Loki Season 2 in the What If Season 2 trailer. So you're always wondering when they actually planned this, because it takes forever, like years, to do animation-related stuff. I'm not totally expecting Deadpool to show up during What If Season 2. I think that'd be more like a What If Season 3 kind of target, and for X-Men related characters, just in general Fantastic Four characters, just because I think they want to debut the new live-action versions in the MCU and like the new Fantastic Four movie before they start doing a lot of animated Fantastic Four stuff, and because we have X-Men 97 episodes that are coming right after What If Season 2 episodes, they don't want to steal any of X-Men 97's thunder. I just did a big teaser trailer video for that, so I'll link it below in the description. A lot of people also asking if Deadpool is going to show up during X-Men 97 episodes because they're already working on Season 2. It's always possible. There was a version of Deadpool in the original X-Men the animated series, but obviously it wasn't Ryan Reynolds' version of the character. So they do rope in brand new Deadpool stuff to the new X-Men 97 episodes. It'd be a little bit different. Click here for my other Deadpool 3 video with all those clips of Deadpool fighting the Fantastic Four and the X-Men characters. It looks crazy. And click here for my brand new What If Season 2 trailer. Thank you so much for watching. Everyone stay safe and maximum effort.